The government can prefer fixed price and still fund like the government. And if that sentence doesn't make you slightly uncomfortable, congratulations, you must be new here. Because this is where contractors get themselves into trouble. They hear from fixed price and they think, oh, great, that's clean and simple and predictable. Well, maybe, but fixed price is about the price. And funding is about obligation, authorization, fiscal year monies, options and CLINs, appropriations, and continuing resolutions. And whatever budget drama wandered into the room this week wearing a badge that says guidance pending. So sure, all of those things are related, but they're not the same thing. So today we're going to talk about fixed price, half funded, because the price may be firm, but the funding may still be fuzzy. And you don't want fuzzy to be the cause of your heartburn for the next 5 years and 6 months.
This broadcast has been cleared for public release, but just barely.
Broadcasting from deep inside the federal acquisition labyrinth, this is the GovCon Show. This show is for acquisition pros, wannabe pros, and procurement insiders who need a place to unpack the chaos. We speak fluent contracting and sarcasm. No clearance required. This is the GovCon Show. And away we go!
Welcome back to the GovCon Show. Let me be upfront about something. A clearance is not required. Now, whether you're new to this game or you've been in this field 20 plus years, you know this job is not just about paperwork. And sometimes it is no more than pure chaos. And on this show, we've seen it all and we've done it all and we talk about it honestly. Sure, with a little sarcasm, some days a lot, but a whole lot of truth. And with just enough attitude to keep it real. But no filters and no fluff, just real conversations from the front lines about government contracting. So welcome to Season 2 bonus episode, Fixed Price, Half Funded. Okay, let's start with this one core point, and that is contract type and funding status are not the same thing. Firm fixed price tells you something important. It tells you that the contractor agrees to perform the work for a fixed price. And generally, that price does not adjust based on the contractor's actual cost experience. That's why fixed price can be attractive to the government. The government wants the price certainty, the budget discipline, the performance accountability, less cost growth, less we spent more than expected, please reimburse us energy. And under the recent executive order, agencies are being pushed harder toward fixed price and performance-based contracting as the preferred method. The executive order frames fixed price contracts around clearly defined outcomes, predictable timelines, and prices generally not adjusted based on contractor cost. And that's fine. That is the contract type conversation. But funding is a different conversation. Funding asks how much money has actually been obligated, which CLINs are funded, how long is the period that the funds are covering. Are options funded? Is the work incrementally funded? Is the contract conditioned on availability of funds? And then what happens if funding is delayed? Can our performance continue? Do our invoices get paid? That's the part contractors cannot afford to sleep through because fixed price does not automatically translate to fully funded. And assuming it does is how companies stroll into the acquisition labyrinth with a flashlight made of optimism. Now, the FAR makes this distinction pretty clear. If a fixed price contract is fully funded funds are obligated to cover the price or the target price of the fixed price contract. Now, it goes on to say if a contract is incrementally funded, funds are obligated only to cover the amount allotted and any corresponding increment of fee. That is the whole ballgame. Fully funded means government has obligated enough funds to cover the fixed price obligation. Incrementally funded means the government has only obligated part of it. So when someone says it's fixed price, your next question should not be, great, when do we start? Your next question should be, is it fully funded? And if the answer is no, then you need to ask more questions. You need to ask questions like, well, how much is funded? What work is funded? For what period? Against which CLINs? And then what happens when you reach the funded amount? What notice requirements apply? Because that's a real risk. The contractor may accept fixed price performance obligations while the government funds the work in pieces. And if the contractor doesn't manage it carefully, the company may be carrying both performance risk and funding uncertainty. And that's not simple. That is fixed price with a trap door. We all recognize that the government can prefer fixed price and still have a harsh funding reality. I mean, really, an executive order can push agencies toward fixed price contracts, but it does not repeal the appropriations law. The order did not magically create full year funding. It did not make continuing resolutions disappear. It certainly did not eliminate agency budget constraints. And it certainly didn't turn every option period into a guaranteed cash cow. Most importantly, it does not mean that just because the government wants a firm fixed price contract, the contracting officer can obligate funds that are not available. That matters. I mean, it really matters. So when people hear firm fixed price and just think that means fully funded, nope, that is not what the executive order did. What it did was to direct government employees to say, we prefer firm fixed price. And then they still have to follow that up with something similar to, we only have funding for this phase, or this CLIN is the only funded CLIN, but that CLIN too is not funded. Or something like the base period is funded or partially funded, but options aren't guaranteed. Performance may continue only up to the funded amount. Or the more common answer right now is guidance is forthcoming. And that's it. The phrase has aged more contracting professional than direct sunlight. Guidance is forthcoming. So contractors must separate the policy preference from the funding mechanisms. Fixed price may be the preferred structure, but funding will still follow the money available, the appropriation, the fiscal year, the agency's budgets, and the contract-specific funding language. That is where the real work lives. So do you see the dangers for contractors in this new environment? Do you see where contractors are getting hurt? Let me give you 5 examples of potential dangers for prime contractors. And your business size has no bearing on these issues. These apply to large businesses with the same force and effect as they apply to small businesses. First, they assume the total contract value equals funded authorization. It may not. The contract may show a large total value, but only part of that amount may be obligated. Second, they assume options are real money. Options are not money until exercised and funded. They may be planned for, they may be likely, they may be in the budget fantasy slideshow, but until they're exercised and funded, do not treat them like spendable oxygen. Number 3, they assume customer need equals authorization. The customer may need the work. The program may want the work. The mission may depend on the work. But need is not funding. Want is not authorization. And urgency is not a contract mod. Fourth, subcontractors run ahead of your funding. And this one can get really ugly. If the prime is only incrementally funded, but subcontractor commitments may require varying expenditure profiles, multiple subcontractors can require variable or flexible funding profiles, and others may be more static or time-based. These situations are real and are very likely, and they will certainly create exposure downstream for the prime. But at any rate, the subcontractor performs, costs are incurred, materials may be ordered, people may be staffed, and now the prime has a problem. If the government funding doesn't arrive when expected, the prime has a major problem. Fifth, they do not document decisions in real time. They keep going because everyone believes the money's coming. And maybe it is. Maybe it's not. But if the file can't show what was funded and what was authorized and who gave direction or why the contractor continued or stopped work, then the company may be left reconstructing the story later. And we've talked about that enough this season. Reconstructing the story later is where confidence goes to become evidence with gaps. All right, so moving on. Let's talk about the bigger issue. Fixed price plus funding uncertainty creates a different risk profile. Under fixed price, the contractors are already managing cost, schedule, performance, and profit risk, right? But if the scope is clear, the price is sound, the funding is clean, and the customer behaves like a reasonable adult, great, that can work. But if your funding is uncertain, it's delayed or partial or phased or tied to options, now the contractor has a new layer of risk. Can you staff confidently? Can you truly order those materials? Can you commit to your subcontractors and plan your travel? Can you hit your performance deadlines if the funding doesn't come in until very late? And are you able to absorb the delay? If you have a delay, can you restart efficiently? Can you protect your profits if the work starts and stops? And under fixed price, the answer matters because the government is not automatically paying your actual costs just because reality became difficult. That's the part contractors need to internalize. The risk does not become smaller because the contract is called fixed price. Sometimes it's easier to underestimate it. So what should you do before moving forward? Start with the contract and not just the headline, not the customer's verbal assurances, and certainly not with the capture team's optimistic interpretation. Start with your contract. And when your contract is not clear, you have to ask the contracting officer the hard questions before performance starts drifting ahead of your funding. You'll have to ask them things like, is this fixed price effort fully funded? What work is authorized under the funded amount? What happens if our funding is delayed? Are we allowed to go beyond the current funding amount? Is the period of performance truly realistic if your funding is phased? And here's the important part. Don't ask those questions just to collect answers. Ask them so your company knows what to do next. Because once the funding reality is clear, the contractor has to translate those answers into internal controls. If only one CLIN's funding, then the program needs to know what work can start and what work can't start. If options aren't funded, capture and operations need to stop treating option work like guaranteed revenue. If the subcontractor scope is not yet funded, then the subcontracting staff needs to avoid authorizing work that the prime is not funded to support. And in the event your payment is tied to acceptance, the program needs to understand that performance and cash flow are now walking together, and one of them may be wearing uncomfortable shoes. That is the contractor's job. The government answers the funding questions. The contractor turns those answers into execution discipline. That means somebody inside the company has to connect the big picture. Finance tracks dollars, program tracks performance, subcontracts tracks supplier commitments. But if nobody connects those pieces, the company can still make a bad decision with all that accurate information. And that is the control point. It's not enough to know the contract is only partially funded. And there's one more place this gets especially messy: teaming agreements. Because during capture, everyone's optimistic. The prime wants the teammates' past performance. The teammate wants meaningful work share. Everybody wants to look aligned. So the teaming agreement may talk about anticipated work share, proposed scope, post-award subcontracting, pricing support and key personnel, exclusivity. And the general idea, if the prime wins, the teammate will get a fair piece of the work. That's fine. But here is the question that does not get asked enough. What happens if the government does not fund the work the same way the team divided it? Because under incremental funding, the contract may not be funded as one clean, complete package. One CLIN could be funded. One TD could be funded. Another one may not. One phase may start. Another one can be delayed. And the subcontractor's portion may be funded before the prime's related work is ready. Or the prime's portion may be funded while the subcontractor's work is sitting in the maybe later pile. And now the teaming agreement starts getting uncomfortable. The subcontractor says, "You promised us work share." And the prime says, "Well, the government's not funded that work yet." "Well, we staff for this." And the prime says, "Well, we can't authorize unfunded work." And everyone looks back at the teaming agreement hoping it says something useful. Sometimes it does. Sometimes it says essentially, "We're very excited in March." That's not a funding clause. That's a memory. So if you're entering a teaming agreement for work that may become fixed price, incrementally funded, CLIN-based maybe, you need to address that up front with your prime contractor. And when the subcontract is issued, the subcontract should not pretend funding risk does not exist. It should address what work is authorized, what work is not yet authorized, and what happens if the government funding is delayed. What happens if only part of the prime is funded? What happens if the funded work doesn't match the capture phase work share expectations? That's not being negative. That's preventing a teaming romance from becoming a subcontractor divorce. Because fixed price funding issues do not just affect the prime. They flow straight into the teaming relationships, your subcontract commitments, all the staffing expectations, even your small business participation plans. And if you do not address that early, the first funding problem may also become your first relationship problem. And all of that is exactly why teaming agreements, subcontract terms, and funding assumptions need to be reviewed before everyone starts treating total contract value like guaranteed work. Because fixed price risk is not only about the price, it's about the whole operating environment around the price. The scope, the available funding, customer dependencies, ODC and travel and materials, subcontractor commitments, schedule and performance metrics, work share expectations. And the uncomfortable question, are we accepting risk that we have not fully understood. If your company is being pushed towards firm fixed price, or if you're bidding fixed price under uncertain funding conditions, go to our website, govconadvisorygroup.com, and run the fixed price conversion risk assessment. And if you have a specific contract, CLIN structure, funding question, team and agreement issue, subcontract concern, schedule a GovCon risk triage call, we can do that through our website. In the meantime, remind your coworkers that firm fixed price does not always mean fully funded, and work share is not real until the contract, the funding, and the subcontract language can support it. So let's bring us home. The government may prefer firm fixed price, but the government will still fund like the government. That means contractors have to stop treating contract type as if it answers the funding question, because it doesn't. So before your company says yes, ask the ugly little questions. Is it funded? How much? For what work? Through what date? Which CLIN, and what are the limits? That is not being negative. That is valuable contract management. And if someone says, don't worry, the funding should show up, pause, breathe, smile politely, and ask, great, where does the contract say that? Okay, guys, that's going to do it for this bonus episode. This has been the GovCon Show. And if this episode helped you, annoyed you in a productive way, or reminded you of a funding meeting you're still trying to forget, do us a favor. Subscribe wherever you get your podcast. Hit that like button and share it with another GovCon professional who needs to hear it. If your team needs help identifying where fixed price risk is hiding, visit our website and run the fixed price conversion risk assessment. As always, we're broadcasting from deep within the acquisition labyrinth. We're getting anything done requires 3 approvals, a meeting, and someone in the background yelling, let's circle back. And yeah, this bonus episode was cleared for public release. But just
If today's episode sounded a little too familiar, that's probably a sign. Until next time, keep your files tight, your logic tighter. Remember, if your compliance approach is built on checking boxes, you're building risk. We'll see you next time on the GovCon Show.
This broadcast has been cleared for public release, but just barely.